Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to join you here this evening. A great Australian friend of mine who has lived in London for a long time tends to use the expression, "I love English summer, it's my favourite day of the year." So you have to give King's College and our leader huge points for courage for putting forward something called a summer reception. But I actually think the weather gods have been with us and it's bearing that title. So great to join you on this one day of the year. It's also terrific to be here with Louise Casey. We were last together for something called Policy Idol, where bright young people come and put their solutions to complex public policy challenges, and they are judged in the same way that the various, idol competitions on television are judged. It was all going very well until two young men stepped up to put their solution to homelessness, whereupon, frankly, I think Louise had a red mist descend and they're never going to forget that critique of their policy proposal. It's also a great privilege to be here with Sir John Major and to listen to that speech, which was a tour de force. And Sir John, I think if cartoon style, a thought bubble had come rising from the heads of the crowd as you were speaking, that thought bubble would have read, "When it comes to British politics, they don't make them like they used to." So thank you for being with us. I want to build on Sir John's analysis and ask ourselves the question, who runs the world? Now, what answer you're going to give to that will depend on your perspective. Obviously, a conspiracy theorist is going to say something quite different to a foreign policy specialist who is going to say something quite different to a military planner who is going to say something quite different to a global business leader. But surely one take on who runs the world is who gets to go to the major international conferences and events that are brought together to create the space for global problems for this fractious world of ours to be discussed in the hope of finding some solutions. You would have seen the photographs of the recent G7 discussions, one of the bodies that brings leaders together, and as you swept your eyes across those photos, you would have seen one woman in them, Ursula from the European Union. When the United Nations General Assembly meets in New York in September, there are around 190 nations that will be brought together in the UN General Assembly. Currently, if all leaders attend, you will see about 15 women out of that more than 190 nations. When the G20 meets later this year on the beautiful island of Bali, hosted by Indonesia, if you swept your eyes around that table, you would find that Ursula had found a friend. She will be joined by Kristalina, who leads the International Monetary Fund, but they will be the only two women in the room. So no matter how you choose to look at the question, who runs the world, the answer isn't going to be women, and it isn't going to be teams that represent the full diversity and richness of humanity. And that is a challenge for all of us. A challenge because the evidence increasingly shows that the best decisions get made by diverse teams that can leverage different strengths. And the evidence, I think, increasingly tells us that if we want people to have faith in the future, if we want people to have faith in democratic projects, if we want people to have faith in change, then they have to see their faces represented around the decision-making table. Gone are the days when people are prepared to look at structures that in no way represent them and give their consent to be led by those structures. So there is a challenge for all of us as to what we can really do to embrace diversity and equity and inclusion in decision-making, whether that be at local community level, at national level, in the business community, the legal fraternity, the police, the policy makers, the global financial structures, and the list goes on. We at the Global Institute for Women's Leadership, which it's my privilege to be the chair of, take one particular view of that. We focus on gender equality. That doesn't mean that we ignore other forms of diversity and inclusion, because we take the view that these sorts of stigmas and prejudices and disadvantages aren't queued. You don't start with one and then work your way to another. They're actually multi-layered, and so as people go about their life experience, there are many characteristics that people present to the world with, which means that they will find a world that doesn't quickly and readily accept them as a genuine equal and for the full contribution that they've got to make. I'm very passionate about this project of the Global Institute for Women's Leadership, where we mobilise evidence and research into action to try and increase the rate of change towards gender equality. I'm passionate about it because it strikes me as a great moral wrong that the World Economic Forum tells us that at the current rate of change, we won't have a global community with gender equality for more than 130 years. And I'm doing my best to eat my vegetables and get moderate exercise, but I'm not going to make it that far into the future. And frankly, even the younger people in this room aren't going to get there either. So we've got to quicken that pace of change. And it also breaks my heart that we know that many of the things that are being done by political parties, by businesses, by organisations of goodwill now are not the most effective things, that there is money being wasted, minutes being wasted on interventions that do not have the greatest results. I came out of my experiences in Australian politics very keen to see us do more to deepen the evidence base and to quicken that rate of change. Given my experiences, this was a personal mission for me. So I had percolating in my mind how fantastic it would be to have an action-oriented research institute that was bearing down on all of the barriers that stop women coming through for leadership and helping clear them out of the way as quickly as possible. It was when I came to the King's Policy Institute that I knew that I'd found the right home for that endeavour, because the people in this room, drawn from the Policy Institute, which Bobby Duffy leads, are people who really understand that culture of the best of evidence and research, but putting it into action, making sure that it makes a difference in the world. You know, research is fantastic. Think of the Nobel scientists that brought us the COVID vaccine. Vaccines are wonderful. Vaccines in people's arms are a hell of a lot better. And so if we don't take that research into action, we actually don't change our world. And so it is, after a number of years of endeavour, that we've got this huge sense of lift-off at the Global Institute for Women's Leadership. I'm very pleased that a number of my key colleagues are in the room, the bright young researchers that do all of the hard work. All I do is hang out and sort of leverage off their talents. And also our broader Global Institute for Women's Leadership family. We've been joined by people from industry, from all walks of life, who have brought their talents and their enthusiasms into this project. And it's terrific to be able to celebrate it with you at this King's Summer reception. But let me give you fair warning, as summer turns to winter, presumably that will happen tomorrow, as summer turns to winter, we will be asking you to come back and celebrate with us as the next year rolls round, because we will be at our 5th anniversary stage, and that will be the time that we will be asking you to be thinking and once again bringing your energies and talents into that Global Institute for Women's Leadership family. So thank you for the opportunity to address you tonight. I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening, and what a privilege it is to sit on a panel like this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Louise, you played on the metaphor of a sandwich, which sort of makes me the wrapper, because I was that thin, flimsy piece of paper outside. And Julia, you made fun of our summer reception, but you'll see we were cautious. It's a summer reception, but it is indoors. So John, you cautioned us of the retreat of democracy, the retreat of globalization, the rise of nationalism, populism, Louise, you reminded us that these are not just global esoteric challenges. There are challenges right here on our streets in London. So these aren't things we can just sort of examine as distant things. There are things we have to work here. And Julia, you reminded us about the shamefulness of representation. Perhaps the only hope one can take in that is that maybe humanity hasn't solved its challenges because we've not as yet fielded our best team. And I hope that that team is to come. But then you have to ask yourself, where will the solutions to all of these come from? And there's only one place they can come from. It's the power of ideas. That is what the history of mankind has been. It's about the power of ideas. But the question is, where will those ideas come from? And I think perhaps if something has changed through rationality, it is those ideas will come through evidence. Those ideas will have to be hardened in some sense in the steel of evidence, but that will only happen, as you pointed out, through open discussion. But more than that, thoughtful disagreement. And perhaps if there is less of what we have now, is the idea of thoughtful disagreement, where you have the courtesy of listening to the other party before you choose to disagree. And I think that is what the universities need to bring to this debate. We used to be, and still are probably, the main venue in society where hopefully thoughtful disagreement is still possible. But I'm really pleased that in some small way, we as Kings have been contributing to that through the King's Policy Institute, which makes possible not just thoughtful discussion amongst academics, but reaches out to the wealth of wisdom in society as represented by all of you here today. So in thanking you, I would like to recognize and celebrate the King's Policy Institute, particularly a shout out to its great director, Bobby Duffy, who, as usually his modest self, will be somewhere in the background trying to hide from credit. But I can assure you, Bobby, no matter where you hide from credit, we'll always find you. So with those words, I thank you all. I can remind you that our quartet will start playing again, so please do get ready to listen to them and do find some more refreshments and time for networking. But before we depart, our special thanks to our speakers today, Sir John, Baroness Louise Casey, and Right Honourable Julia Gillard.